Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalava Giravaradari Jannavalava Giravaradari Gopi Jannavalava Giravaradari Vallabha Giravaradari Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Tira Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Chari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravaradari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravaradari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravaradari Gopi Jannavalabha Giravaradari Jashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yashodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Shodanandana Brajajana Ranjana Yamuna Tira Vanachari Vanachari Yamuna Tira Vanachari Ravanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Radha Madhava Kunja Bihari Jayom Vishnupada Paramahamsa Paribrajacharya Astatara Sata Shri Śrimad His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Jayom Vishnupada Paramahamsa Paribrajacharya Astatara Sata Shri Śrimad Srila Bhakti Santa Saraswati Thakur Ki Jai Anantakota Vaishnava Vrinda Ki Jai Namacharya Thakur Hridas Ki Jai Prem Shri Gaho Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaitin Garash Vesari Gaur Bhakta Vrinda Ki Jai Shri Radha Krishna Gopinath Shamakund Radhakund Gira Govardhan Ki Jai Shri Vrindavan Dham Ki Jai Dwarka Dham Ki Jai Mayapur Dham Ki Jai Bhakti Devi Ki Jai Tulsi Devi Ki Jai Jamuna Mai Ki Jai Ganga Mai Ki Jai Shri Harinam Sankirtan Ki Jai Brihat Madranga Ki Jai ISKCON Founder Acharya His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada Ki Jai Shri Radha Govinda Ki Jai all the blessed devotees who are serving Shri Radha Govinda Ji Ki Jai Gaur Premanandi Hari Hari Bol Samaya Bhakta Vinda Ki Jai all glorious assembled devotees all glorious assembled devotees all glorious assembled devotees all glories to Shri Guru and Shri Gauranga all glories to Prabhupada Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So today we are reading from Śrimad Bhāgavatam, Canto 4, Chapter 7, Text 55. Maitreya Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Dishta Prajapati Patir Harim Achitva Kratunasvena Devan Ubayato Yayat. Maitreya Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Dishta Prajapati Patir Harim Achitva Kratunasvena Devan Ubhayato Yajat. Maitreya Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Dishta Prajapati Patir Harim Architva Kratunasvena Devan Ubhayato Yajat. Next, please. Dishta. Devan Ubayato Yajat. Maitreya Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Dishta Prajapati Patir Harim Achitva Kratunasvena Devan Ubayato Yayat. Mataji's? Maitreya Uvacha Evam Bhagavata Dishta Prajapati Patir Harim Architva Kratunasvena Devan Ubayato Jayat. Maitreya Uvacha said, Evam, thus, Bhagavata, by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Adishta, having been instructed, Prajapati Pati, the head of all the Prajapatis, Harim, Hari, Architva, after worshipping, Kratuna, with the sacrificial ceremonies, Svena, his own, Devan, the demigods, Ubhayata, separately, Ayajat, worshipped. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Maharaj Srila Prabhupada. The sage Maitreya said, thus Daksha, the head of all the Prajapatis, having been nicely instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, worshipped Lord Vishnu. After worshipping him by performing the prescribed sacrificial ceremonies, Daksha separately worshipped Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. Please repeat. The sage Maitreya said, thus Daksha, the head of all Prajapatis, having been nicely instructed by the Supreme Personality of Godhead, worship Lord Vishnu. After worshiping him by performing the prescribed sacrificial ceremonies, Daksha separately worshipped Lord Brahma and Lord Shiva. Purport. Lord Vishnu should be offered everything, and his prasad should be distributed to all the demigods. This practice is still followed in the temple of Jagannath at Puri. There are many temples of demigods around the main temple of Jagannath, and the prasad, which is offered first to Jagannath, is distributed to all the demigods. The deity of Bangalini is worshipped with the prasad of Vishnu, and also in the famous Lord Shiva temple of Bhuvaneshwar, the prasad of Lord Vishnu or Lord Jagannath is offered to the deity of Lord Shiva. This is the Vaishnava principle. The Vaishnavas do not deride even ordinary living entities, including the small ant. Everyone is offered proper respect according to his position. The offering, however, is in relation to the center, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Krishna or Vishnu. The devotee who is highly elevated sees the relationship to Krishna in everything, and he does not see anything as being independent of Krishna. That is the vision of oneness. Namo Vishnu Padaya Krishna Prashtaya Bhutale Srimati Bhaktivedanta Swaminite Namane Namaste Saraswati Devi Gauravani Pacharane Nirvashe Shasunyavadi Pastacha Deshatarane Om Ganatimarandasha Jananjanan Shalakaya Chakshuram Militam Jaina Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Mukam Karoti Vachalam Pangam Langayate Girim Yakripatamaham Bande Shri Gurum Dinataranam. So in this purport, Srila Prabhupada, he mentions how the prasad of Lord Jagannath is offered to Bangalin, who is actually Parvati. And sometimes that temple is referred to as the temple of Bimala, which is another name for Parvati. And there's a very, very ancient history of why that specific type of worship is done, where the prasad is offered to Jagannath, and then to Bimala, Parvati, and then later to Lord Shiva. So once upon a time, Lakshmi was with Lord Vishnu, and he gave her a very specific instruction, and that was to do not give the remnants of his prasadam to anyone under any circumstance. He gave her very specific instructions. Please do not give the remnants of my prasad to anyone. So Lakshmi accepted that instruction. And at that time, Narada Muni went to Vaikuntha, and he was performing austerities there and doing service to please Lakshmi Devi. And he pleased Lakshmi, and she expressed a desire to offer him some benediction. And so Narada Muni said, yes, I would like to ask one benediction from you, but I need you to promise, absolutely promise, that you will meet my desire. And she said, oh, so be it. And then he asked Lakshmi, can you get me some remnants from the plate of Lord Vishnu? And so she immediately was like struck with a kind of terror and a dilemma, because she'd offered this benediction to Narada Muni, and her Lord and husband, Lord Vishnu, had just previously said, never offer my remnants to. And so she was very disturbed. She didn't know what to do. And later, she was serving Lord Vishnu, and he saw that she was troubled by something, and Lord Vishnu asked Lakshmi, I can see that there's something that's distressing you. Please tell me. And so she explained how she was very sincerely dedicated to following his instruction, to not give anyone his remnants, but somehow by providence, Narada Muni asked her for a benediction, and that benediction was to get some of his remnants. And so for Lakshmi, that was a complete bewilderment. And so Lord Vishnu, he told Lakshmi, we can find some way to work around this. And so he told Lakshmi, today when you bring me my meal, at the end I will look to the side, and when I'm not looking, you can take my remnants away and give that to Narada Muni. So indirectly, Lord Vishnu didn't see that she was, so he gave her the green light. So Lakshmi took that Mahaprasad of Lord Vishnu, gave it to Narada Muni, and it's described, actually this pastime is described in Chaitanya Mangal. Narada Muni went into complete ecstatic ecstasy. He was just dancing like a madman in joy and ecstasy after taking that Mahaprasad. And it was described, he was in so much ecstasy, he began to travel all the universe just chanting and dancing in complete ecstasy, carrying his veena everywhere he went. And eventually he came to Mount Kailash, where Lord Shiva is. And Lord Shiva saw Narada Muni in this amazing state of spiritual ecstasy, and he said, my brother, what happened to you? Please tell me what happened to you. And so Narada Muni told Lord Shiva that by inconceivable mercy, I have attained the Mahaprasadam of Lord Vishnu. And Lord Shiva said to Narada Muni, who's actually his brother, he said, well, my dear brother, where's my portion? And Narada Muni said, well, I eat everything. And Lord Shiva said, how could you do that? I'm your brother, and you didn't save even a morsel for me. And so it's described Narada Muni, he was feeling a little ashamed. And he put his head down, but then he noticed under his fingernail there was a little bit of the remnants of Mahaprasadam. And so he lifted his hand up, and he told Lord Shiva to come a little closer. And he said, oh, there's a little bit of the Mahaprasad under my fingernail. And Narada Muni stuck his finger in Lord Shiva's mouth, and Lord Shiva was able to get that last little bit of this Vishnu Mahaprasad. And then it's described, Lord Shiva began to just go into complete ecstasy and dance, and it was described, it was like the dance at the end of the universe. And it was so intense. They told Parvati, you have to calm your husband down. Everyone's thinking it's the end of the whole creation here. And so Parvati went to Lord Shiva to try to pacify him and calm him down. And Lord Shiva calmed down, and she said, well, what happened to you? And he said, I received some Mahaprasadam from Lord Vishnu through the hand of Narada Muni. And so Lakshmi Devi said, oh, where's my share? And Lord Shiva, he became embarrassed because there was nothing left. And he explained to her, and it's described Parvati became extremely angry. How could you not save me even a morsel of this prasad? And she was furious. And it's described, she was so furious, it's described her glance could have burned the entire creation. And it was actually described that the heat of her anger, actually, the demigods were feeling it. They actually got Brahma to go to the ocean and milk and petition Lord Vishnu to come and try pacify Parvati before the whole universe was burnt to ashes. So Lord Vishnu came to Kailash, and he saw Parvati, told her to calm down, and he said, I will give you Mahaprasad, don't worry. And she said, no. She said, I just don't want Mahaprasad. She said, I want Mahaprasad for every living entity. She said, I want Mahaprasadam for every single living entity in the creation. And Lord Vishnu said, so be it. And he told Parvati, I will appear in Nilachala as Jagannath, and there will be a temple of you, and the remnants of the Jagannath deity will be offered to you. And because your husband, he didn't give you any, his temple will be at a little distant place, Bhuvaneshwar, so he will get the remnants after you. And so Lakshmi, she was satisfied, and because of that, everyone in the creation was blessed that they would get Mahaprasad. And we see that as the case in Jagannath Puri, even though they don't allow non-Hindus to come into the temple. They distribute Mahaprasadam, you can buy it, there's a free distribution booth, and actually sometimes if you go to Jagannath Puri and you do kirtan outside the temple, close to the Garuda Stamba, do a nice kirtan, some of the pujaris who are sympathetic to the devotees who aren't able to come into the temple, they will come and bring the devotees Mahaprasad. We were there with Vaisheshika and a few other devotees, and the Brahmins came out with all these pots of Mahaprasadam for us. It was such a blessing. And actually Madhavananda was there, and he made a very good point. He said, although the devotees, ISKCON devotees, are not allowed in the temple, in one sense, it's a special blessing because the pain of separation can be greater than the pleasure of meeting the Lord. So, although we're not allowed to go into the Jagannath temple, we have that desire, and that's also very puring and very spiritual. Your Rath Yatra is coming up, isn't it? Yeah, July. How soon? June 14th. Rath Yatra was a desire of Srila Prabhupada. We all understand how it was the pastime when Prabhupada was a boy, how he had a desire to have a Rath Yatra cart, and he went with his father to find a carpenter who could make a small cart for Prabhupada, as he was a small boy. And they couldn't find anyone who was willing to do it, and it's described how Srila Prabhupada, he just began to cry like any child would when their wish is not met. And some lady came and asked, well, what's the problem is this child having? And Guru Mohan Dey, Prabhupada's father, said, well, he wants a small Rath Yatra cart. I can't find anyone to make one. And she said, oh, I have one. You can have it. And so she gave that small Rath Yatra cart, and there's a very beautiful description how Srila Prabhupada, he would arrange a Rath Yatra festival near his home, and it was so wonderful. He arranged prasadam and everything that the neighbors, some started complaining, well, why didn't I get invited? So it would become like a big festival. So that was actually Prabhupada's desire to have Rath Yatra. And actually Srila Prabhupada, one time he was speaking to devotees about this childhood event and his arranging that festival, and he said, just as I was doing then, I'm doing now. He said, do you understand? So this was somehow, Prabhupada had some vision even as a child of some things that we cannot understand that were going to happen. And Srila Prabhupada, there's another interesting childhood thing that Prabhupada did. He explained once that as a child he had a tricycle. He would ride this tricycle, and he would observe sometimes in Calcutta there were the streetcars that were electric. So they have these, I don't know what they're called, the poles that go up to the power lines, and that enables the streetcars to travel all over. And Srila Prabhupada said, after he saw that, Prabhupada said he was thinking that if he could get on his tricycle and have a long stick, he could touch those wires and travel all over the world. And Prabhupada did. Prabhupada did that. So it's such an amazing thing. So Rath Yatra is such an amazing festival. The prasadam distribution, here's describing Jagannath Prasad. The potency of Mahaprasad. In Vancouver, a very nice devotee joined. From external vision, he looked like a redneck, big, burly, husky guy, very strong, very coarse voice, and maybe a person you might think was not really a candidate for being a devotee. And he told me he became a devotee because of prasadam. And in Vancouver, the Rath Yatra parade along the route, they would distribute prasadam from the cart. They would throw fruits out into the crowd. And so this devotee, his name's Bhima, said he was just standing there watching this spectacle go by, and he saw this orange come flying at him, and he grabbed it, and he said he started to peel it, and he said he started crying. And he's this big, burly guy. He was so much affected by prasadam. That one orange from Jagannath inspired him to become a devotee. And we see at Rath Yatras all over the world how the prasadam, the free prasadam distribution, it's just so huge. In Vancouver, the parade was held in one spot probably for 25 or more years in a very upscale part of Vancouver along something called Beach Avenue, beautiful park area that goes down to the beach on one side. Thousands of tourists walk that trail. The cart goes down there, big high rises on the other side. People are looking out the window. And all those people, a lot of those people come to the festival. And they have money. There's hundreds of restaurants. They could go anywhere for their meal. Rath Yatra Prasadam, I mean, when you're cooking for 10,000 people, sometimes it's nice, but sometimes it's a little simple. In Vancouver, the Rath Yatra free prasadam booth opens when the deities would get to the festival site and be put on the throne. At that point, they would start serving prasadam. So I was the head pujari, so I would always bring Jagannath down. And over the years, I noticed that the line of people waiting up for prasadam, waiting to take prasadam, was getting longer and longer and longer. And sometimes there'd be a line up, 5, 6 people wide, maybe a couple hundred yards long. These people just eager to have Jagannath prasadam. So it's such a potent, powerful, spiritual thing, prasadam. Something sometimes we take for granted, and very easy to take for granted, but it's good to reflect on that sometimes. And especially at these festivals, we have the opportunity to distribute mass prasadam like this. It's really great fortune for those people who take it. And I'm sure there's so many stories here of Rath Yatra. Rath Yatra, there's like miracles always happening. So one other thing that's interesting in this pastime is Daksha at this point, he has the head of a goat, but still he's conducting all this worship and saying all these prayers, and it's described to how, although Daksha, he didn't have his original head, he had another head. It was still the same Daksha, although he had a different head. And were you talking about heart transplants? Yeah. One of our godbrothers once was, we were in Mayapur, and some devotees were putting their relatives' ashes in the Ganges, and he had some ashes from his father, and somehow the subject came up that his father had a heart transplant. And he said after the heart transplant, his father was exactly the same person, hadn't changed a bit, except previously he didn't like dogs, and now after the transplant, he liked dogs. So maybe there's some little... But so here Daksha is, he has a different head. And Prabhupada explains earlier in the previous chapter when Daksha got the transplant that the matter of the brain is not actually where our intelligence comes from. It's described as like an instrument. So the brain, the different parts of the brain, it's instrument for the spiritual and even the material knowledge that comes from Supersoul within the heart. And also our natures and characteristics are also stored in our spirit soul, which for all of us is in our heart. So Daksha, despite the fact he had that transplant, he was still Daksha, a pure spiritual entity. Maybe a little tinged sometimes with passion and ignorance, but it was the original Daksha. And we can see from that pastime also the utmost importance of not committing Vaishnava aparad. Daksha committed the most serious aparad to Lord Shiva, blaspheming Lord Shiva, and it was so done in such an incredibly offensive way that his daughter committed suicide. As Uttama was saying, she self-immolated. She just, I don't want to have anything to do with this body that I received from my father. I want to give it up, and she's gone. So that's, as Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, how the mind can be the friend of the living entity and it can be the enemy as well. So we have pure spiritual knowledge, and we have this instrument called the brain, and it's just, as like Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, Yantra, Rudrani, Maya. Yeah, we're situated as if in a machine made of the material energy. And different machines, different instruments, they function properly and sometimes they malfunction. And just like cars, they have sometimes they'll have a little engine light that goes on if the car overheats. And it's important to pay attention to that. Uttama's father once was driving actually her brother's car, and he said he was driving into the sun, and he didn't notice the engine light went on, or a check engine light overheating, and the car seized up. So you don't want to miss those signals. So similarly, we have an instrument, our brain, our higher self, and our lower self, and it's important we learn to make that distinction. We have a higher self and have a lower self. And our higher self functions from the mode of ignorance. Functions from the mode of goodness, and our lower self from the modes of ignorance and passion. And sometimes the modes of ignorance and passion can rear up. And Prabhupada explains that in the 14th chapter, how in the material world the modes are competing for supremacy. Sometimes we're in goodness, passion may pull us down, ignorance may pull us down further, passion may bring us back up a little bit, then goodness might rescue us and bring us out, and sometimes it's a bit like a up and down battle. And Srila Prabhupada mentions in one purport how by practice one can develop the mode of goodness. One can develop the mode of goodness by practice. So what does that practice mean? And we see in Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives many examples of different types of consciousness and activities in the different modes of material nature, and that's extremely important information, especially speech. It's pleasing to hear. It's beneficial, and so we understand that's speech in the mode of goodness. And speech which is hurtful, unkind, inconsiderate, coarse, or vulgar, definitely in the lower modes of material nature. And sometimes it is possible to fall into that, especially if, like Daksha, he had some, you could say, baggage with Lord Shiva. He had a dislike for Lord Shiva. And that manifest, and we could use the word escalated, to the point where he lost control of his higher self, and he acted from his lower self, and the results were catastrophic. Although it came out well in the end, by Krishna's mercy. But in spiritual life, in the process of sadhana bhakti, we can learn from these pastimes that it is extremely important to control our minds, and it's extremely important to learn to understand how the modes of material nature are acting upon us and how we can make that shift from the lower modes to the higher modes. And just like different instruments, they'll give you some warning. Even your phone will tell you if it's overheating. And so ourselves, if we're a little introspective and careful, we can learn to see if we're getting a little physiologically aroused. If they have an expression, I flip my lid. Literally, you lose touch with your higher self. And that's what happens when you act from the lower modes of material nature. You lose touch. There's one part of your brain called the prefrontal cortex. It processes logic, reason, compassion. So that's coming from the heart. And your prefrontal cortex, aka your higher self, is able to action that platform. But when we get escalated materially, that part of your brain goes offline. And whatever comes out of our mouths at that time is generally very unconstructive, hurtful, unkind, basically could just be put in a rubbish bin. So important to realize that and learn to understand the symptoms. Because we understand from Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu how to be able to constantly chant the holy name of the Lord, we have to develop this humility, tolerance, and patience. Be more tolerant and devoid of all sense of false prestige, and ready to offer all respects unto others. And sometimes that's hard. Sometimes we get provoked. Jem Hasmi was telling me, like sometimes someone might say or do something, but it's kind of like you said, judo? Jiu-jitsu. So jiu-jitsu is a fighting art that somehow someone's going to attack you, they're going to punch you, but you use their energy. The guy starts to throw a punch, and the jiu-jitsu expert, he just grabs the guy's arm, and all of a sudden he's flipped over. He transforms that energy. So sometimes also someone may criticize us. And the tendency, as soon as there's criticism, to get defensive. It's a natural conditioned response. But if we hear criticism, we could pause for a minute and think, okay, jiu-jitsu, how can I take that energy and turn it? And so someone criticizes you, you could say, oh, Prabhu, thank you for that feedback. Would you like to come with me for some Mahaprasadam? So you didn't react, you become proactive, how to turn that interaction toward the mode of goodness. And those are important aspects of Krishna consciousness, how to actually control the mind, understand the practical application of the philosophy, how to transform interactions that could turn negative to the extreme extent of dakshas, like that's the epitome of Vaishnava aparat. So even sometimes we might just be making small Vaishnava aparats. I might just say something in a little demeaning way, or even I might just walk away with a little mental attitude for that person. And that's also unhealthy. In Kali Yuga, it's described mental offenses aren't taken seriously, but we actually want to stop those mental offenses too. Srila Prabhupada describes that the Supreme Personality of God in Vasudeva, he's Shuddha Sattva, absolute pure goodness. And to understand him and to one day enter into his realm, we have to come to the platform of Shuddha Sattva ourselves. And again, how do we do that? By practice, by learning to control our minds and understanding the philosophy of Krishna consciousness and how to implement it in our lives from day to day, moment to moment, interaction to interaction. And is that easy? No. But again, Prabhupada said by practice, it's possible. So this is actually a very wonderful, instructive pastime, very colorful, and lots to reflect on here. So does anyone have any questions or comments?
When I joined the movement, there was kind of a standard that authorities would severely chastise, and Prabhupada also chastised, and that was, from my understanding, it was a responsibility of the guru to do that to a disciple. But then it became kind of the standard within ISKCON. Just the whole Radha Damodar bus parties, heavy duty, but it wasn't used properly. That's my sense, and it became a disadvantage devotionally for a leader to fall into that. I know I fell into it. It was a big part of my agenda. And but so this became habitual for many devotees, but it was counterproductive for the loving exchanges that are required on the Madhyama Vaishnava platform. I'm sorry? It was counterproductive.
Counterproductive, yeah.
I thought it was productive, but it was all fear-based rather than love-based.
Yeah.
And
So you're saying there's a principle there. Anger can be used in Krishna service, and anger can be used to instruct, but it has to be done in the right way.
it has to be done with love.
Exactly.
That's the point.
Exactly.
But generally speaking, on the neophyte platform, devotees would utilize it in ignorance.
Yeah. I'm chastising you because I'm angry. I'm angry at you, not that I'm concerned that you make spiritual advancement. I'm frustrated, and I'm acting from my false ego platform rather than a platform of compassionately trying to get your attention somehow.
Anyway, that's something that I think we all need to consider.
Yeah.
And in the whole area of criticism, it's that's a super. And even though there may be a fault in someone, if we just focus on that, it's so destructive to our spiritual lives.
What did Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur say? I can't remember the exact words, but he said, rather than, I don't know if he used the word, focus on the faults of others.
I got the quote.
Oh yeah, it was like, should we turn the torch?
You want me to read it to
Sure,
you?
yeah, it's good, yeah.
Hold on one second. It's right in my 25-year-old sloka.
Yeah. Well worn.
Then, amend yourself rather than pry into the frailties of others. In this world of Maya, averse to the Lord, full of trials and tribulations, only patience, humility, and respect for others are our friends for Hari Bhajan. When faults in others misguide and delude you, have patience, introspect, find faults in yourself. Know that others cannot harm you unless you harm yourself. Dashosmi Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati. Shesha Prabhu has this framed, and he has it on the wall in his living room. He was in this heavy-duty GBC position for so many years. North American BBT trustee, Minister of Education. But it seems to me that it's one of the most important principles that we need to follow. Because it's so easy to lapse into this modality of finding fault with somebody. There's so many problems in our spiritual lives, so much problems in our movement.
Our late godbrother Gopal Krishna Maharaj, he used to say, we all have a PhD in fault finding. There's a Prabhu at the back has a comment or question. I'll get you afterwards. I only have one memory of my mother ever chastising me, and I'm sure she probably chastised me a lot. But my only memory is I was quite small, and I was looking up at her. I have no idea what I did. She had this wooden spoon she would use to get my attention. And I remember saying, Mom, I hate you. And she said, I'm doing this because I love you. I don't remember her whacking me. But it always stuck with me that she was trying to correct me out of love, not that she was angry at me. She wanted me to learn something. It always stuck with me.
Hare Krishna. On this business of correcting, it's a responsibility. Even if there is no love, sometimes it has to be done. So this is dealt with in the 5th canto, 1st chapter, where Lord Rishabhadev says that the king, the father, and the guru have to give proper instructions to the citizens, the sons, and the disciples. And even if the citizens, the sons, and the disciples don't follow, go on giving the proper instruction. That's what's required. So if you take on the responsibility of being a king, a father, or a guru, you have to give proper instructions.
Yeah.
That's part of your responsibility.
Yeah.
There
And
may not be
important-
love yet,
Yeah.
because what love is there in this material world anyway? Prabhupada gives the example of one boy whose parents died, so he was an orphan, and he was raised by an aunt. And that aunt loved him like anything, and whatever he did, she would never chastise him. She would just go on loving him, loving him. And he became so deviated that he committed murder. And then he had to be hung. Before he was hung, he asked to see his aunt. And when she came, he said, "Come closer, I want to tell you something." And he bit her ear off. He said, "If you had chastised me when I was growing up, I wouldn't be in this position." So it's not just about love. You have the responsibility of giving proper instructions based on your position as a leader, administrative leader, or a parent, or a guru.
Although at the same time, that chastisement has to come from a platform of love. I actually have to, if I'm going to chastise someone, I have to do it because I'm concerned about them. Because if I have some anarthas in my heart that I haven't really rooted out, I'm probably getting angry because I see myself in that person. Like in the English language, it's a very dysfunctional language. I'll say, I'm angry. But I'm not angry, I'm a spirit soul. And in Old English, you would say, anger has come upon me. So why has anger come upon me? Here's some devotee or some of my friends, someone's doing something wrong. Okay, anger has come upon me. Anger is meant to give us some direction, some motion. And I can pause and think, okay, anger is meant for protecting Krishna's devotees, protecting them, protecting the deity. Is this really the correct emotion? So I'm concerned, but what degree of anger do I need to exhibit? There's different degrees of emotion, so I can be angry or I can be firm and steady on the point I'm trying to make. And I think there's a subtle nuance in emotions that sometimes we tend to go to the grosser emotions. Because sometimes it's not actually anger, it's a very great concern. And I think if we can express those kind of instructions with a great concern, even we might have to turn up the volume, it's going to be received better because it's coming from the heart rather from our ego. And it's perceived, because the people who were chastised by Prabhupada, it was like, it was nectar being chastised by Prabhupada. It was like, not easy, but it was transcendental. It was coming from a very pure platform. And that's hard, especially for anyone, if we're new in the temple, we can try and avoid seeing faults. But for a manager, it's actually the manager's duty to try and keep everything on track and keep the devotees on track. The Hipajari is always on everyone's case to be on time. And it's not easy sometimes to do that service in the right loving consciousness, because it's easy to get frustrated. Uttama?
I don't see that the point is whether we should correct or not.
Yeah.
I don't see the point is whether we should correct or not. We should correct,
Yeah.
and we should help. It's in what mode we're doing it. What mode of nature we're correcting. Like you're saying, it's the king, the guru, the father's position to correct and guide. So that's no argument there. Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So even if you're doing it out of duty, you have to do it in the right mode, though, or it's not going to be effective. Like you see, when Prabhupada would correct someone, he could exhibit anger. Next minute, he's totally calm. We exhibit anger, and we're still boiling for half an hour.
That's called the Rudra principle.
It's not under our control. So, yes, duty comes before love, and it's our duty to do it in such a way that the recipient learns. And most of the time, when we're actually able to make change, there has to be some safety that I feel like the person cares, not that I'm just being manipulated. So it may not be love, however, if we don't feel that the person cared, like we totally knew Prabhupada cared. But if we don't feel like the person cares, you do it out of fear, like the people are saying, I don't know how much you're actually going to change your mentality, which is really what we want to do. It's change the consciousness, help change the consciousness of someone. And it's our duty to do it in such a way that they can change their consciousness, however that is.
There's something Prabhupada explains as the Rudra principle, like when we get angry from the lower modes, it tends to just, Prabhupada describes how you like clench your fists and the chest becomes tight. And Prabhupada said that is the Rudra principle. And then the anger stays in your body for quite some time until it can depressurize. Whereas someone was saying earlier how Prabhupada, he could be hard as a thunderbolt and the next minute totally soft as a rose. And Satsvarupa Maharaj gave one example that he wrote some letter and it was supposed to have an enclosure. He forgot to put the enclosure and he mailed the letter without the enclosure. He went to Prabhupada and told Prabhupada he made that mistake. And he said, Prabhupada got incredibly angry. And Satsvarupa Maharaj said he just started making all his excuses. Well, I was really busy, blah, blah, blah. He said Prabhupada just got more angry and he made a series of excuses. And Prabhupada just kept on chastising him. And then finally said, Prabhupada, I'll send another letter apologizing and say that I forgot the enclosure and the enclosure is in this envelope. And Prabhupada immediately dropped it. Just in a second, it was finished. So Prabhupada wanted to make that point. And what he was looking for was Satsvarupa to make a correction, not to make excuses. He just wanted to correct it. But yeah, again, it's that point of trying to learn to correct even children with love. Have you ever seen a kid flip out? This happens in the temple sometimes. Little kids flipping out. The mother flips out because the kid's flipped out. And the flipped out mother is trying to calm down the flipped out kid when she's flipped out. And it just doesn't work. So anyway, this is not an easy subject because this is why we're here in the material world. We can't regulate our mind and senses. But it's an opportunity for us to practice, to gradually, at least we know what we're aspiring for, love and compassion and kindness in all circumstances. And we may not always be there, but we know what the standard is. Because the danger is, as Jamasmi was saying, in the past, we did think that was the norm. And that can be unconstructive. It can actually end up damaging people's creepers. They don't feel comfortable to be in the movement with that kind of... So it's important that we learn, and even sometimes we may try to correct someone, whether it's someone in the temple, our friend, our spouse, whoever, and maybe we escalate and do it in the wrong way. We can always go back later and say, I probably could have done that a little better. I'm sorry. I could have done that better. I'll try and do that better next time. And we see how Daksha, he made amends for his storm that he created.
One thing, the Rudra principle, when there's this intense exchange, then, the blood pressure goes up, there's all this real intense emotions. So what I understand is a way to deal with that is just take a time out. Let's talk later.
Yeah, simple.
Let's time out now. We won't continue, but let's talk later at a heart-to-heart level, and I think we'll gain a deep understanding. And that's what I've found, that you actually can, then love can be expressed. Mm-hmm. But if you try and do it in the middle of the tornado...
You can't, because you lost touch with your higher self.
Yeah.
And that time out, in terms of physiology, in terms of the instrument we have here that's trying to transmit from our heart, it's disconnected because we get in the lower modes, and physiologically, when you're escalated, your body's flooded with adrenaline and cortisol, and that's why all the energies go into your core organs. Yeah. It takes 20 minutes minimum sometimes for that to get filtered out of your bloodstream, and then you can come back in touch with your heart.
Yeah.
And
then it can go on in a way that's reasonable for both parties.
Yeah. It's interesting, Srila Prabhupada, I was, recently I was just looking at this quote, and Prabhupada was saying, it's okay to fight, Prabhupada said. Sometimes you might have some argument, you might fight about how to serve Krishna, and then he said, but there should be no discord. And I thought, well, I thought discord actually means the same thing as like a fight. And if you look at the definitions in the dictionary, discord does imply there's like a conflict kind of. However, discord, the definition of discord is two notes that aren't in harmony. And it creates like an unpleasant sound. And I read that, I thought, well, that's what Prabhupada's referring to. It's like almost like a musical discord, because it's described in the spiritual world, all talking is singing. So even in the spiritual realm, sometimes there's little tiffs between Radha and Krishna and the gopis and the cowherd boys, and the parrots are having this disagreements. But the center is on Krishna, so it's totally sweet. It's sweet. So that's where we're trying to go, so that even our differences of opinion become pleasurable. They bring us closer together. One last comment from the Prabhu over there.
Okay. Thank you for your class. Lots of nice points. You're talking about the the consciousness isn't necessarily associated with the brain. I worked with Sadhaputta for 17 years.
Oh, yeah.
He had a case in his file about a British neurologist named John Lorber who studied people who had hydrocephalus, and their head was like mostly cerebral spinal fluid and not brain. There was cases when it was like 95% cerebral spinal fluid and just a little bit of brain, and the people would have an IQ of 126 or something. That's amazing. You're talking about about coming to the platform of goodness, and when I took the Bhakti Shastri, Jayadvaita Swami called our attention to this beautiful paragraph from Prabhupada's preface to Nectar of Instruction. In all spiritual affairs, one's first duty is to control his mind and senses. Unless one controls his mind and senses, one cannot make any advancement in spiritual life. Everyone within this material world is engrossed in the modes of passion and ignorance. One must promote himself to the platform of goodness, Sattvaguna, by following the instructions of Rupa Goswami, and then everything concerning how to make further progress will be revealed.
Mm-hmm. Sorry.
It's very inspiring.
I think we should end, and we can control our restless minds and senses by taking Krishna Prasadam now. Haribol. Jai. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. Vaishnava Sangha ki jai. Hare Krishna.